Here's a tricky one for you, and I don't know whether you know it or not, but besides the famous coffee can amp, what was the first piece of Carver equipment ever to come out? Not that.
The first one was the phase. It was actually a phase linear one. That counts, right?
What was the Carver name?
No, it had phase. That was a phase linear. Yeah. But the first Carver name was, what was it? The Cube. I think it was a little Cube amp. No, maybe it wasn't.
Which was the coffee can amp, correct?
No, God, it's been 30 years. How am I supposed to remember these details? I remember the timing, but not their sequential numerical. I remember, but not by numerical sequence. The coffee can amp was first, and that was a phase linear amp, not a Carver amp. And the reason was I was a starving physics student, and I wanted to make an amplifier company, but I didn't have any money, so I couldn't even afford a chassis. That's why I used the coffee can as the chassis. And it was sort of fun. In the old days, there was this thing called the Macintosh Clinic, and it was great. In the United States, we all love races. Everybody likes fast motorcycles, big companies, fast cars, always races. Amplifiers too. Big amplifiers were in. And we had amplifier races that were put on by the Macintosh Clinic. The Macintosh Clinic would advertise in the newspaper that they were coming to town, and anybody that had an amplifier could show up and get a performance graph and have their amplifier tested and put into this race. You had to stand in line to get up to the starting gate. And it was funny because the amplifiers in those days, this was a long time ago, were very heavy. And people would go, Davey O'Brien would test it. 30 watts. Then the next one, bigger Macintosh amp, do a 75. Here, I'll help you carry this, son. Somebody else will grab it. 75 watts. And so I had a coffee can amp. I was so broke, not only could I not afford a chassis, but I couldn't afford a power transformer. So I was sneaky. I decided I wouldn't put a transformer in it. I'd use the transformer on the light pole. That was big transformer. So I picked it up, and I went, 700 watts. Nobody believed me. They peered inside, and I was just the butt of the joke. Oh, what do you tune this for? Best reception on channel 7. There were wires in this coffee can sort of poking out. So Dave O'Brien and his rep fired it off. They put it up on the bench, and they turned it on. Now here's the way it worked. Dave O'Brien was a factory Macintosh man, and they had their local representative there, the Macintosh rep for the Seattle area. So one guy would run the graph, and one guy would make the measurements. And so I'd say, okay, fire it off, and you turn it up. It goes 60 watts, 80 watts, 100. 150, 200. Now all the people that were around me at the time that had been making these crazy jokes and teasing me got very quiet. 250, 300. And the rep said, when is it clipping? And Dave O'Brien said, I remember this like it was yesterday. This is so true. It's not clipping, meaning it's not running out of power. It's not at its power level. So then he kept on taking it up, and I knew it would clip pretty soon, but just before it did, all the lights in the store went on.
Good one. Good one.
So you can imagine my surprise, the store's surprise. We went looking for the fuse box, finally found it. And I said to Dave, Dave, just don't test it over 350 watts. Otherwise, we'll put the store dark again. So he said, okay. So he tested it at 350 watts. And I got a graph from him that showed this great performance right down at the bottom. Every graph they would ever give to anybody, except somebody who owned Macintosh, looked like horrible. Yeah. Lots of distortion, underpowered, lots of distortion highs, lots of distortion lows. Macintosh graphs were always at the bottom, nice straight line. And so was mine. At 350 watts, and he signed it, And I knew that I had something really important. So what I did with that graph is I made copy after copy. I made hundreds. I think I made 1,000 copies at least. Yeah. And I sent those out as a brochure. And I had no cachet then. It was Bob. Who's Bob? But Macintosh had a lot of pizzazz, and everybody recognized that name. And so when I sent their graph of my amplifier out, I was in business. And that's how I started Phase Linear.
Where were you working at the time? Or did you have it out?
No, I was a graduate student, and I was trying to start a company on the side. And that started because my professor, my physics professor, I had a job for him. He had gotten some money from the Boeing Airplane Company to build the world's biggest amplifier and the world's biggest woofer. They were going to make the sound of a jet engine at takeoff. And so I and some other graduate students and my professor were working on this, the biggest subwoofer in the world. It was huge. It was flat, plain subwoofer it was made out of steel and didn't have a voice coil. It had hydraulics moving it. And the hydraulics were operated by a valve under high pressure oil, like several thousand PSI. And that was the biggest, and it did, it worked. I built the amplifier, and what fun that was, to build the biggest amplifier in the world.
Didn't the guys at Macintosh, when you showed them that amp and you had in line up, didn't they follow up with you with anything like that? I mean,
What was the look on their
Did
face?
they try to hire you?
Hmm?
Did they not try to hire you?
No, they didn't. They were too mad at me.
Do you still have the coffee can amp?
I have well, I don't. I have a replica of it though, and somebody made a replica and sent it to me. And, you know, I saw that coffee can amp. I couldn't believe it on eBay just about 1 year ago.
Yeah.
Who saw it? Anybody saw it?
Diane sent it to me, I think.
Was it you that sent it to me? You did?
And unfortunately, nobody here was able to snag it.
No.
Yeah,
I think it went
should've
for like
snagged it.
$1,800, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like $1,500 or $1,800 it sold for.
It's not worth it.
It wasn't worth
No,
it.
it's not worth it.